Did she help you to see why we say that nuclear weapons are gendered, security is gendered, that even that it isn't right just to say, well, but nuclear weapons would kill everybody equally? It's every aspect of building up towards nuclear weapons, as well as the decisions to use them, as well as the radiation, how the radiation affects those who are not killed immediately. All of this is connected to a system. And unless we can actually address that system as well, and while we are addressing nuclear disarmament, we will only ever get partial solutions. Now, she only had 10 minutes to give that. So she didn't go into the kind of detail I've been able to go into about what those humanitarian impacts are. And also that I personally think, and I know she is very much in agreement with this, that just as we took some of the first important steps towards dismantling the hegemony of the nuclear-armed states and their dominance over the world order and over world decisions of all kinds, when we carried on and actually persuaded and engaged with and worked with the majority of the UN member states, who were in fact the non-nuclear majority, and they negotiated with support from us, but this was government negotiations in the UN. We were not the negotiators. We could advise, we could ask for, we could educate on some of the issues, but this was a treaty negotiated by governments, and 122 of them then adopted the treaty text, which is more than have adopted most treaties in history. And this does change everything. Not overnight, but it does. And now on your screens, you can see something else that at the time seemed, well, long overdue, but also sort of, before it happened, it seemed impossible. And once it happened, it seemed obvious. But it also, to quite a lot of people, seemed like something that maybe was just going to go on the books, in the documents, as a resolution that everybody then forgets about. But that didn't happen. It's been built on and built on and built on in all kinds of ways. So this is UN Security Council Resolution 1325. And it was adopted on Halloween, 31st of October, the year 2000. And for any of you that know about how witches were slaughtered throughout Europe and certain other countries for at least 3 centuries, of course they weren't witches, were they? They were wise women. They were the doctors. They were the midwives. They were the nurses. They were the healers. But they ended up coming up against patriarchy and, in the case of Europe, Christianity. And these were wise women that had some power within their communities, that were listened to, that helped people. And they were demonized until they were slaughtered, burned, drowned, tortured in their millions. And witches became a figure of fun. and a figure of fear and demonizing in children's books. So when this became adopted, and it was pure chance that it was the way the UN calendar worked, that this resolution was adopted on the 31st of December, sorry, the 31st of October. I was with a couple of the women from Women's International League for Peace and Freedom and also Amnesty International at that time, who had played an incredibly important role in getting this treaty through the UN Security Council. One by one, they worked on every individual member of the Security Council, not just the 5 permanent, the other 10 as well. And they achieved a good text, a fairly strong text, not good enough, not strong enough. It's had to be worked on. And New York that evening had its Halloween parade. And there you have all these people dressed in witches' hats, ghosts and all kinds of things. And it's kind of a fun parade in many ways. It's a kind of crazy parade. But it just made me think about how that date, which had become a date of laughing at in many ways, all of these ghosts and goblins and, witches, was also a day in which women had succeeded in taking the next step towards being recognized, not just as the victims of the wars and the conflicts and the poverty and the policies, but as agents of change, recognizing and strengthening women's agency as peacemakers and peace builders, demanding increased participation in conflict prevention and those peace processes, and early recovery, and early warning systems, also paying attention to what women were noticing in their villages, because that often was one of the early warning indicators that the men were beginning to demonize others and that there was going to be a collapse into war. And also in governance and in peace operations. And since then, there have been an awful lot of, there have been further Security Council and other kinds of resolutions, and the Security Council just last October 2018, delivered a report, which was, I hope I included that in the reading list. If I didn't, you can Google it, in which it actually studied what happened when you started involving more women in negotiations, whether they're treaties or their peace processes or anything. And here again, we're not talking about the bodies. So don't come back and say, yeah, but what about kind of, despotic women leaders, Margaret Thatcher or incompetent Theresa May, because of gender discrimination and patriarchy. If one woman leader is not very good for whatever reason, or is very militaristic, you get this assumption, and it gets said, oh, well, that's the problem. You can't, women can't be leaders because they get too emotional but it's structural. Who enabled and allowed somebody like Margaret Thatcher to become the first woman Prime Minister of the UK? It was the Tory men, because she had become, and they saw in her, but also they put her through so much kind of, they used her in all kinds of ways. And it was, they elected her at a time that they thought that they could use her and that they could get rid of her and put a man in. she had other ideas, of course. But the reason why she was even acceptable for them to choose at that point was because she had become more militaristic than most of them. She was more, and that often happens. If you've only got one woman, then the women that rise into those kinds of positions, often you also see these strong women leaders who take over a position from a man who has been killed, perhaps a strong armed male leader, who is a relative in some ways. That's another mechanism by which the wrong women are put into a position, but they're put in a symbolic of the dynasty they're attached to. And they are not there, they have not built up a role as agents of change. They are there to be a figurehead. And it's only when you get far more, and this is what this UN Security Council report from October 2018 shows more clearly, that the more women you have, up to 50%, and remember, we're talking about trying to get a few women into a system that has been so dominated by men, or by women. You know, when they changed the parliament system for certain countries after the war in Iraq, and we saw this with Afghanistan, the first women allowed to be sitting as members of parliament were there because the UN had said there have to be women, and the patriarchs had not wanted there to be women who would make change. So they made sure that it was their mothers or their wives or their sisters that they could control. But what this requires, and what increasingly is happening, is that women are being elected in their own right. They are not just in that position to be the executors of patriarchy, to do the job of fronting, of representing policies that actually still benefit toxic masculinity and the patriarchy. Because the more women that you get, and again, it's also not about ditching the men and having 60%, 70%, 80%, 90%. No, we're still a long way. I can't remember, I think it's 7%. We're a long way from 50% still in most of the institutions of world governments, of world governance, and in most of world governments as well. And so what this is talking about is that things will only change as the ratio gets closer to 50-50, which is the ratio of male-female gender in biology, in society. And of course, as I've said, I think there is also a spectrum between the really testosterone-fueled He-Man kind of Tarzan, one extreme kind of image of masculinity, right down to perhaps the very passive, obedient, very, feminine, heavily kind of doll-like Barbie. So, but the difference between Tarzan and Barbie is actually a spectrum. And all of us as real human beings, because those are fictional, we come somewhere along that. That is the joy, the richness of human society, but it's been channeled into these binaries. And so here I just wanted to show here a couple of things. Actually, perhaps it's not needed now, but it was the one time that I chose to speak. I had spoken when I was at Greenpeace at the test ban stuff, but at this point was when we needed to actually launch the thinking behind getting the nuclear abolition treaty at the UN, at the NPT 2010 review conference. And So I finally said, okay, I'll do that. We also had Jodie Williams to connect with that, talking about how they banned landmines and why this is necessary. And I didn't, we now know what the treaty is that we got in 2017, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and what it contained. But I saw this as I was going through some really, really old PowerPoints when I had to get my new laptop going. And I was struck by what I was saying in 2010 as actually being very prophetic of the treaty we actually got. I was saying a nuclear abolition treaty under international humanitarian law would prohibit the use, deployment, production, stockpiling, transfers of nuclear weapons and require their total elimination, their complete elimination. And I kept saying that, and more people kept saying that because we made it into a campaign. ICAN. As I said, it was founded in Australia in 2007. It was an abolition campaign. In fact, the name was given to it by a Malaysian doctor who was part of IPPNW. And he said after 2005, he said to the other doctors, he said, we have to have a project that is actually a campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. And then the name was based a little bit on the ICBL, the International Campaign to Ban Landmines. And then the word just came out, I can, we all can. And then it was through my collaboration with them that we brought it to Geneva and founded it as a much more international campaign because we had to be in Geneva for the diplomats there because that's the disarmament thing. But then I'm just going to show very quickly just a few slides that show you sort of some of the things that ICAN did. Here we have, meetings in Tunisia that actually involved a lot of Arab states, and the only woman there was the ICAN woman, but she had actually organized the meeting. This is Ariel, and but still the Arab representatives there, they were all being sent as men. And this is one of our Kenyan colleagues who is now also on the international steering group for ICAN, Lynette Ngayu. And she serves also as representatives of Religions for Peace, which is worldwide, and she's particularly representative of the African part of that. And this, if I'm not mistaken, is a meeting of CELAC in Latin America. And again, there's CELAC, CELAC, which is the governmental CELAC, and there's CELAC, SEHLAC, which is actually based, I think it's headquartered in Brazil, but it's a network of the civil society. And our Brazilian and Mexican representatives are of CELAC. So CELAC is also a partner organization on the steering group. So a Nobel Peace Prize winning organization from Latin America, same Peace Prize as mine, as ours, that I showed you. They have their Nobel medal as part of 27 award to ICAN that they use especially in their campaigning. And CELAC was interesting because really they got founded around the issue of banning landmines and then cluster munitions, and have a number of survivors of landmines in that campaign. And ICAN learned a lot actually from CELAC and from the landmines survivors and campaigners about how to do our campaign to ban nuclear weapons differently from how nuclear disarmament campaigns in the West had been done before. We really learned a lot about how you get the vote out, how you get your governments. So this was very decentralized campaigns. ICAN met with, and I think this is one of the, it was a round table that comprised diplomats, governments, Red Cross, and ICAN to talk about why all of these governments should back negotiations to ban nuclear weapons. So we held lots of regional, instead of doing it all centrally. We didn't do it centrally from Switzerland, but we needed to have a staff based in Switzerland to engage with the diplomats on day-to-day issues. And this one was just before we were about to do a big UN meeting. In fact, I can locate this exactly. This was the night before the second phase of the negotiations in 2017 took place. Here to the right is actually a British Member of Parliament called Caroline Lucas. In fact, she's a Member of Parliament for the city that, she's one of three of the Members of Parliament for the city of Brighton and Hove, which is where I now live. But she's also a long-standing friend that goes back to Greenham days. She's the Green Party, the only Green Party member of the UK Parliament, Caroline Lucas, and this is her Chief of Staff. And, yes, this is, so I'm blanking her name for a minute, but she's the director of Scottish CND. She's the coordinator of Scottish CND. And she came to Scotland several years ago as a migrant from Romania, she and her husband. But she was very passionate about peace. And she first of all volunteered with Scottish CND. And I don't know why, I'm 65, and you know how you talk about a senior moment, sometimes names go out of my head. She's an absolutely lovely young woman. She's now, she's just had her second baby, and it will come to me but anyway. And, but this is a group of the civil society, and we all met together the day before. Well, we encouraged everybody to come into New York on the Saturday and take part in a demonstration of women to ban nuclear weapons. And all of us came. It started raining almost as soon as it was like the heavens opened up. Thunder, lightning, deluge for the whole of the demonstration. The chair of the negotiations spoke in the rally right in front of the UN. We had to rig up. I'm British, and I don't think I had been that wet because we just walked through the deluge of rain. And there was a whole group of hibakusha from Japan with a big banner, and they were all in their wet weather clothes, and it was just so wet. And I can remember this man who spoke very good English, but he was with the hibakusha, and he just said, when he spoke, he said, "The heavens are crying because we haven't yet banned nuclear weapons. They are crying to tell us that we have to ban nuclear weapons. They will stop crying when they know we have heard them and will ban nuclear weapons." And it was just so wonderful because, everybody laughed and clapped, and had just this image that, in being deluged, it was not that the elements were against us, it was that they were encouraging us to ban nuclear weapons, and indeed we did. So I really like that. And this, again, is an example, from ICANN that makes these connections. This is actually in Tel Aviv. And it is a group of primarily, but Israeli campaigners against Israel's nuclear weapons. And but they have some of what are known as Arab Israelis, who are actually Palestinians, the small minority of them that still had the right to live within Israel. But it's again these connections that are being made between societies. And this was the Civil Society Forum of the very first International Conference on Humanitarian Impacts of Nuclear Weapons. And again, we made it, these were the two MCs, if you like, that we chose, sorry, wrong way around, to introduce everybody. I was speaking, I think I was one of the first speakers to actually talk about the whole strategy for this. But I just wanted to show this kind of thing. And then this was a bunch of really young people from the band generation that I showed you, but that was when they were just getting started. And they didn't have the passes to have access into the negotiations because there were only a certain limited number. So they staged, and most of them actually came from Scandinavia, mostly from Norway itself and Sweden. But and a number of them, anyway, and they chose as their messaging to be, when they were outside the hall, they chose to say thank you in lots of different languages. They said thank you. And this was one of the times when I came out. At that time, I was very much identified as you know, in the role that I'd played to really set things up. And I was co-chair, and I was the president of the ICANN kind of, we called it the Swiss entity, but it was the legal entity for ICANN in Geneva. And we had to officially have something called a president, so that was me. But the co-chair was really the role that I played with Akira Kawasaki and Tilman Ruff. So as I came out of this, of the conference, they called me over, they said, photo. And I just, this is the photo of it. And they emailed me the photo, and it just, you know, it was so great. And again, I just wanted to show some of the images where you can see how ICANN was really transferring increasingly over from people of my age who'd been long-time anti-nuclear campaigners to the younger generation, and especially providing real opportunities and access for younger women in the UN. But we also paid tribute, and this was Setsuko Thurlow speaking on behalf of civil society, as you can see from this that she has in front of her, during the negotiations, about her experience as a 13-year-old girl in school on August the 6th at 8:15 in the morning, 1945, August the 6th, when they heard a plane buzz over, didn't pay much attention, and then suddenly everything was, her whole school collapsed on her. There was a huge bang, her whole school, and she describes that. And then we weren't, of course, just about talking to governments. It was very important. And even before we got the treaty, we were working with a lot of members of parliament, elected representatives. And of course, members of parliament are different in all our different countries, aren't they? So we have to, but it wasn't sending somebody from afar, having a global coordinator, leader type person. No. The way ICANN did it was we developed materials in conjunction, you know, we developed materials, and then we sent these materials and we engaged, and we asked the activists in all the countries. They were the ones taking the lead. And obviously quite often they would invite us, or we would find a way, we would hold a round table in that country, and we would always make sure there were people from that country, ICANN partners from that country in the round table, not just from our secretariat or, you know, from ICANN secretariat or ICANN steering group, although often there were people, of course, from the staff and the steering group. But it was very important to decentralize. And in the fullness of time, we got that Nobel Peace Prize. And I just like the juxtaposition of Setsuko was one of the two women, in fact, that we chose that would actually officially on behalf of all of us. And one of the reasons was that a number of us, while we of course felt very proud to be given the Nobel Peace Prize, and the Nobel Committee explicitly said, we are awarding this to ICANN for its work in mobilizing civil society around the world for a treaty-based prohibition of nuclear and elimination of nuclear weapons. That was pretty well the phrase they used. So it was collective from the very beginning. But, you know, there have been hibakusha since 1945. Isetsuko is only one of many survivors. There are organizations in Japan, Hidankyo, and there's another one, you know, of survivors of the nuclear bomb. And they have been nominated many times, but they never got this. And certainly for me, I felt a little bittersweet about it because, of course, we were proud that it was given to ICANN, but I almost wish it had been given jointly to two organizations, which they sometimes do, that it had been given to Hidankyo or the hibakusha organizations from Japan and ICANN together. But the Norwegian committee makes its own. Sayonara. We are losing our professor here, who has to go back. I think he's traveling back to Japan, isn't he? Ohashi-san. Thank you, Ohashi-san. And then having gone from showing Setsuko, this was the team of us. This is the steering group team in Oslo, in the snow, although it wasn't very heavy snow, we were lucky in that regard, with the certificate, the original, and the one that is being held here by Christian from CELAC, this medal, which is actually the one that's solid gold. The other 12 medals that were given to us for us to use and take everywhere is not solid gold. So please don't steal it. I know you won't. It is identical in size and weight, but it is, you could call it a replica. Some people do. I don't think it's a replica because it's symbolic. So the Nobel Peace Prize is the Nobel Peace Prize. And I and Ray and Akira Kawasaki here and Claire, you know, Christian, Ray, you can see Ray right next to Celine. You know, we were the team of the steering group that developed and made this happen. But we also acknowledged that we made a network that was far, far larger and broader than us. So what are our next steps? Because I think I'm nearly at the end of this. Yes, I am. Good. Okay, our next steps. We want to bring the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons into force as soon as we possibly can. We've set ourselves 2020, and there are a couple of reasons for that. We decided to use quite a bit of the Nobel Peace Prize money because they, as well as giving the certificate and the medals, they gave us quite a lot of money. And we decided to set up a 1,000-day fund for the entry into force for the treaty. That would run from the 1,000 days, really from 20th of September when the treaty was opened for signature at the UN, and it takes us to 2020. And so we increased our staff in Geneva because we were really on a shoestring. We possibly would have to have gone down to just one member of staff if we hadn't got the Nobel Peace Prize. Now we have 6 or 7 because our funding is also, you know. So we did this, and so this invites a lot of ICANN partners in different countries to put in a project proposal for relatively small amounts of money, but for how they are going to work with their government to get that government to sign, if it hasn't already signed, because, as I said, 70 governments signed on the very first day at the UN on the 20th of September. But to try to get more governments on board, and particularly once they've signed, to projects to work with the parliamentarians or the civil service, because every ratification process is different in every country in the world, it seems. So we seed some of that money, we give it out as seeds to the local organizations as well as having more staff that are dedicated towards entry into force. We have 2 members of staff that's their major job. One is based in Australia, one is based in Geneva, but they travel around quite a lot. So that's part of it. Then 2020 also is symbolic because that's the next review conference of the NPT that we've talked about on the last 2 days. And so we're requiring the full implementation of disarmament. And that's of the disarmament and non-proliferation obligations. And here you'll see I never talk about civil and nuclear energy as an obligation. It isn't. As I said earlier, and I think I said in my PowerPoint, but I didn't give the detail of that, it's an incentive offer. It's not. Oh, there are only 2 kinds of obligations in the NPT, and that is disarmament in return for non-proliferation. And those, I've misspelled article. When I'm doing this sometimes, Article 6 is the word you're supposed to be seeing there. So, and now, having put a big priority on the non-nuclear countries to get the treaty, now we have, again, the responsibility really also now, we have to take it back. Me as a British citizen, the Americans, the Chinese, the Russians, the French, the Indian, Pakistani, Korean and Israeli partners with ICANN, and civil society that maybe are not formal partners, because sometimes it's not so easy to set up an NGO to be a formal partner in that way with Western organizations, but who want to bring their government into this treaty that prohibits nuclear weapons. We now take back our responsibility to work with our own nuclear-armed governments domestically to get them to reduce their reliance on nuclear weapons, to reduce their numbers of nuclear weapons, to move towards nuclear disarmament, and then in doing so, then to get to a position where they are ready to sign and then implement and ratify the treaty. So that's when we've really gone back to really doing a lot of work on nuclear disarmament. And remember that the US, UK, and France officially boycotted. They officially released a statement just after the UN General Assembly, by a massive majority, adopted the TPNW on the 7th of July of 2017. An issue was released by Nikki Haley, who was the UN ambassador on behalf of President Trump, together with the UK and the US, and it basically said, we don't accept this treaty and we're not going to sign it. It was so petulant. It was kind of like, you know, we have this saying in England about the child throwing his toy out of the pram. You know, it was so petulant. We're not going to sign your nasty treaty. We're going to throw it away, like having a little tantrum. But of course, that attitude, that tantrum, is because we're taking power away. It's not just that we're taking the toys, the nuclear weapons, the military toys. We had a song at Greenham. Take those toys away from the boys. Hey, you men, generals in the military, what you want those atom bombs for? You got enough bombs to kill us all 10 times, still you keep on asking for more. Take those toys away from the boys. So this was one of the Greenham songs. I haven't sung that for a long time. It has verses that go, with your B-52s and your F-16. The B-52, wasn't that the airplane that actually dropped the bombs? but was still in service because it was a long-range bomber. With your B-52s and your F-16s and your cruise missiles and your SS-20s, Trident, cruise missiles and your SS-20s, and you got, all these layers. You can harmonize with this song, but then and then the chorus would come back. So we use music, we use songs a lot, and in fact I think I'm going to sing 3 of them on the Saturday evening celebration. But these kinds of things, we have to engage with again now the actual policies of the nuclear armed states, and we have to bring the Middle East and South Asian states, and into regional and international disarmament regimes in the best way. I mentioned getting a zone free of nuclear and weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East, long time on the agenda for the Arab League, on the agenda then for the NPT since 1995. We've got to make this happen. The South Asian states, we've got to move them from just, it's an important thing that they have a moratorium not to do more nuclear testing, but we've got to commit them to sign the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty and then ratify it, make that a legal commitment. We've got to, India and Pakistan participated in many of the meetings and UN General Assembly meetings, an open-ended working group leading up to the treaty negotiations. And then at the last minute, they decided to join the club, the nuclear club of boycotters, to boycott the actual negotiations. I think they regret it now, but that's what they did. So they didn't have their voice in the negotiations, but we need to bring them on board, signing and ratifying the TPNW, because unlike the Non-Proliferation Treaty, this is not discriminate. This is a non-discriminatory treaty. This is, this does not provide status to countries that have nuclear weapons. It requires them to undertake a process of getting rid of them, but there's no status attached. So it doesn't have haves and have-nots in that kind of way, although it of course recognizes the reality in the world, but calls on that for elimination. So the objection that India and Pakistan for years and years and years have publicly given, and they've been supported in this with the non-aligned movement for many years, much less so now since they went nuclear. Their power and influence within the non-aligned has reduced, but nevertheless, they still would always argue that they shouldn't have to join the NPT because it's discriminatory. And then after they did their nuclear tests, they said, actually, we're willing to join the NPT as nuclear weapon states. And then the 5 said, well, no, you can't. And actually, legally, they can't, because you would have to amend the definition in Article 9 of the NPT, and that's not going to happen. So this has to be, they have to be brought more into this process, and then encourage and support the process for peace treaty and denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We have to learn from the past and build security, peace and security, and create a safer, did this come off? Sorry. And create a safer, more responsible future. And this is a photo. As you can see, this is the bomb dome of Hiroshima. And this was during a meeting where Akira Kawasaki, Tilman Ruff, and I had all been invited to address various governments in Hiroshima. And the civil society in the Hibakusha of Hiroshima did this amazing demonstration with little candles, little flames, and we were invited, all of us, at that conference. So Tilman, Akira, and I are somewhere in that crowd, but so are some of the representatives of the governments, former foreign minister from Australia, a couple of former representatives from a number of different countries. And the photograph was taken by, I think it was a Japanese press photographer, but it was sent to me, and I don't know the photographer's name, so I can't give the photo credit, but the credit I give is actually to the people in it, the hibakusha and the Japanese citizens that made this image, because I think it was very powerful, and the fact that they also link it with no war. They are opposed to Japanese militarism of all kinds. So they do, again, are not just acting as the victims of the nuclear bomb, they are acting as agents of change to abolish nuclear weapons and to prevent the change to the Japanese constitution that would potentially enable Japan to go to war again. And this is my very last slide, and it comes from just April of this year, because it's a reminder and it moves into what we will be talking about a little bit more this afternoon, and particularly I'll be talking about in the forum, because this actually wasn't an anti-nuclear demonstration. This was the climate demonstrations that absolutely kind of blocked several locations in London. This is Westminster Square. All of the roads around the Westminster Palace, the British Parliament building, were completely blocked by groups of people. Westminster Bridge, the embankment, not the embankment, the other mill. Again, I'm blanking names at the moment. Sorry, I think I must be a bit tired. Anyway, this mill something street. It's great. I know exactly what I mean, but I can't think of the name of it. People's names, roads' names, they're something that begin to go all the way round. And this building behind is actually the new. It's in the photo because it's actually it's called Portcullis House, and it's actually the new parliamentary building where a lot of the parliamentary offices and meetings are actually held as well. So it has that, and I love this image. We have no planet B. This is the planet. This beautiful planet Earth is the planet we all inhabit. It doesn't matter what part of the planet we inhabit, whether it's the Pacific Islands, China, the Middle Kingdom, whether it is Hong Kong or the British Isles or the Japanese Isles, whether it is the big United States with Canada on one side, Mexico and the whole rest of the continent of America was really, it was turned into North America and South America, but really, wherever you come from, all of Asia, ancient cultures and the newer cultures, we are all part of this planet together with all the animals, the creatures, the flora, the fauna. We are all interdependent. And though we can send a few men to the moon, who was it? It was one of the Hollywood actors, a woman. It was somebody like, I can't remember. It became a sticker that said, if we can send one man to the moon, why can't we send them all? Sorry, it became a sticker. But unfortunately, some of the scientists actually want to kind of do that and are increasingly getting excited about doing mining on the moon and mining on Mars and all of this kind of thing. We have got to prevent any kind of further weaponization of space. We really have. Because that will entomb the whole Earth through debris, as well as entombing the Earth through the dust clouds if nuclear weapons are used. We need to find a way to live together on this planet that we have, with mutual respect and learning from each other, because we've all got something to teach. We've all got something to learn. And that's only by that interdependence dependence, which is, again, this is part of this gender analysis. None of us is independent fully, and we shouldn't be striving for total independence. Is actual total loneliness, and it's total vulnerability. It's interdependence we should be striving from. It's when we all connect up, when we work in solidarity to save the rainforests, when we work in solidarity to prevent a military attack on Iran or a war being fought somewhere else, when we make these connections and we work together, as indeed we are able to do through things like Global University, when we use technology to share information free, not to make it something that is profited by, but free so that everybody can learn, and the teaching can take place in villages around the world, in places that can't, and to people and with people who can't necessarily get into higher education or get into education in their own countries. Girls who cannot read and write because religion, patriarchy don't allow it, because they're supposed to stay in a position where they can be controlled and just get married and have children. All of this, these are all things that we all need to work in solidarity and harmony and building together for a different future, a nuclear-free and interdependent future with security and peace, without militarism, where we can work together to tackle the climate damage we've already done and prevent further harm. There is no planet B. We have the planet Earth, planet A. It's the only one we have. We have to take care of her. And this was, again, some of the things that we used to sing about a lot at Greenham. The Earth is our mother. We must take care of her. The Earth is our mother. She will take care of us. And the song that we have from that was a First Nation chant that was brought to Greenham by some First Nation women from what is called United States. The earth is our mother, she will take care of us. The earth is our mother, we must take care of her. Hey Anna, oh Anna, hey Anna, hey Anna, oh Anna, hey Anna. This sacred earth we walk upon, with every breath we take. This sacred earth we walk upon, with every breath we take. Join me. Hey Anna, oh Anna, hey Anna, hey Anna, oh Anna, hey Anna. The earth is our mother, we must take care of her. The earth is our mother, she will take care. Help me sing. Only when we help each other. Only when we help each other. And that's where I'll end and open it up now for all of you. You see, I needed you to be able to sing the end of that song. I didn't do that on purpose, but the earth was there to remind me and you. None of us are leaders or followers. We need each other. So we still have half an hour, I think, before lunch. I thought you said 1 o'clock. Okay, Well, so this afternoon we are going to hear, do you want to say, we're going to hear from several different, I haven't got my piece of paper in front of me, but so you're not going to get a lecture from me. You're going to get 15 minutes talk from several of us. So I'm going to have my 15 minutes, and we're going to hear from Alini and Anatera, and we're going to hear again from Emiko and Hiroko-san, but not talking so much about the issues, although we are connecting with that, but about how we make the organizations that resist. We're going to hear from Hernan from Venezuela about what's happening there and the way that people are resisting. We're going to hear from someone, I don't know who, but you'll, who are involved in the Hong Kong protests and civil society. And you're going to hear from someone, again, I don't know who, but I'm sure, chosen, who works with communities in mainland China. And then the rest of this afternoon session is going to really involve all of us talking. So we really want to hear then from all of us to talk about not just the problems now, but the solutions, and in particular the human movements, the organizations, the networks that we've created to make the changes that we need. That will take place after 2 o'clock or 2:30? 2:30. So back here for 2:30. Thank you all very much.